Hey, welcome to Think Big. We're here to talk about ideas related to the small business community and new ideas about how they can grow and thrive in good times and in bad.
All right, let's jump in.
Today, we want to talk about an issue that many companies face when they're in recession. Most of them are faced with really some uncomfortable challenges, mostly related to cost control, cost reduction. Specifically, what we wanted to dig into today was really this idea around layoffs or reductions in workforce. And I'm curious, Sean, if you want to just kind of kick us off by helping us understand, not many times does anyone even really question the need for layoffs. When things go wrong or things start becoming hard, why should a company be trying to do anything different?
It's a great question. Let's just assume we're in a recession right now. This will be Kinesis's fourth recession if you consider 9/11 part of a downturn. And these last few years, we've been doing workshops on recession resilience and planning for recessions. So part of that has been studying what are the right strategies to engage in when things start to get hard, and maybe you do need to contain your costs and adjust how much you spend on things. There's some really great research in this area of study that's not very often talked about. Specifically, if you look at the data, companies that engage in a layoff strategy, like a traditional layoff strategy of, hey, times are hard, we're going to cut our workforce by 20%. They have both really short-term problems in that the morale declines significantly, but they also have significant long-term problems, meaning that you'll see things like those who survive the layoffs are tremendously less effective in their job because I think fundamentally the trust has been broken. They're fearful of maybe their job being cut. There's one really powerful study I was looking at the other day that where companies that even experienced as small as a 1% reduction in force would see this, tremendous increase in voluntary turnover the next year. So 1% reduction in force would lead to about a 31% increase in people actively looking to leave the company the following year. And all of this, kind of points to this continued idea that, when an employee joins an organization, they're putting their trust in you, right? They're putting their trust that, you'll make payroll, that you'll provide for their family, maybe provide their health care, retirement, and so forth. And as an employer, when you break that trust, the data shows that it has just tremendous negative consequences to the organization. Now, on the other side are companies that have been really creative, in terms of how they handle adjustments to their workforce. And we've seen some really positive consequences to organizations that, kind of choose to do things differently.
What you just said about trust is huge because what I've observed is no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how justifiable a series of layoffs may be, that broken trust is really hard to bounce back from. And the trying to recapture engagement with your team, it can be really challenging. And it's hard for everybody. It's hard for the people who are going through it, the people who are potentially now fearful of losing their job, or now we've introduced this sort of instability into the idea of where we're at. It's hard for the business owner because, they had to do something that was really, really kind of emotionally traumatic without a lot of sympathy. There's not a lot of support for how hard that is. And then they have to work doubly hard to earn back the trust of the people who are staying on. And so when you weigh all of the emotional weight and all of the sort of logistical effort that has to go into rebuilding after that, it's really worth taking a second look and saying, like, let's let this be the last thing we try. What else can we do? It's a little more creative. It's a little more interesting that hopefully we avoid, all these negative outcomes.
We were talking about Honeywell the other day and how there's such an awesome case study in managing through hard times with regard to workforce. So they went through one recession that was, pretty tough, but not, grueling. And then they went through the grueling recession, which was the Great Recession. And they handled those two situations totally differently. Tell us a little bit more in terms of how they managed through those two different events.
When they hit the 2000 recession, Honeywell did the traditional thing and did sort of traditional layoff styles. Even though they followed it the same way that things have always done, they found that on the other side, it was much harder to bounce back from the recession. They didn't have the people there to support the work. They had to go find new people. And as you were pointing out earlier in our conversation, the engagement level of the employee force just starts to drop. And so they were highly incentivized to explore other options. And so when the 2008 recession hit, even though that was a much harder recession, they ended up coming out of it way better shape than the 2000 recession in terms of sales, net income, and cash flow. And that was because instead of doing traditional layoffs, they experimented with additional forms of handling the problem. Because of their experimentation, they weren't just rewarded with sort of making it, but actually being in a really good position on the other side. I'm curious to hear from you if you've got other great examples.
Well, I think we're early days, but even in this kind of short period of time where, we've gone from, record unemployment to, 22 million people filing for unemployment in 4 weeks, you're seeing companies move really quickly in many cases. And so a good example would be like a company up in Seattle, Gravity Payments, run by Dan Price. Some years ago, he recognized that there was really tremendous wealth inequality between owners of businesses and leaders of businesses and those actually doing the work. He implemented a minimum wage of $70,000 for his workforce. He has been hit hard by this COVID situation because his customers are small businesses, restaurants, bars, the Uber drivers, all those who do small credit card transactions. He takes a little fee off of those transactions. So imagine pretty much overnight, he lost 50% of his revenue. He could have done the traditional route of like, hey, we're just going to cut our workforce. The business isn't there. But instead, he went to his employees and asked them, what can we do? And they helped co-create a plan where employees voluntarily reduced their wages at varying levels, so there was no set expectation. There was no across the board mandate. It was what can you do? And some people could afford to work for no money. They could take a month off. They didn't need it. Others couldn't afford to take any reduction. Some could take percentages. But the aggregate of all those employees working together and sacrificing for one another gave him a ton more runway than he would have had he not made that move. And now the kind of goodwill he's getting from it, not to mention the brand exposure that his company is getting for, really doing right by his employees, all of those things are good. And I'm not saying life's easy for Dan. I'm sure it's really, really hard right now. But that's just one example of a small business owner thinking differently.
What are some other things that people could be looking into? We've played around this idea of different opportunities, being creative. You had to give some recommendations for a company that's in this space right now, is facing hard and troubled times, and they're looking at potentially considering layoffs. We like to say layoffs should be the last consideration. What should they be considering first?
As hard as it is right now, I think this is also a time when can be tremendous creativity. And what I mean by that is thinking differently about how we manage cost controls and cost containment. Some examples we've seen with some of our clients and with some of the folks in our ecosystem are ideas like rolling furloughs. Mm-hmm. So having one person take a week unpaid off or a month unpaid off, unpaid sabbaticals. Some folks just need time more than they need money right now. The idea of work share programs where the state will actually pay partial unemployment as long as the employee is still working a partial week. I find that to be really a creative solution. So, going to employees who maybe are really being stressed by the demands of kids at home, do they want a little more time to be with their family, maybe work 3 days and then have 2 days where they're collecting unemployment. And because the CARES Act provides accelerated funding for unemployment, there's actually quite a bit of money in there to be taking that time off. It doesn't represent such a financial hit to their income. So there's an opportunity there to reduce your costs, but to retain your talent. I'd say, another idea, just like Dan Price used, is to just talk to your teams and look for creativity within their understanding. Oftentimes employees are the closest to unnecessary expenses in an organization. I think you'd be surprised at how many things you can find that employees can actually find within an organization that are opportunities. If you recruit them to the cause, they're more than willing to help out.